Well, today marks the 80th anniversary of D-Day, where Allied forces stormed the beaches of Normandy, starting a campaign that led to Germany's surrender in World War II. 7 News reporter Chad Charette takes us to a ceremony held today in Watertown.
You will bring about the destruction of the German war machine, the elimination of Nazi tyranny over the oppressed peoples of Europe, and security for ourselves in a free world.
It was one of the American military's finest hours and one of the most successful invasions in history. But victory on D-Day didn't come without sacrifice. At Watertown's American Legion, those sacrifices won't soon be forgotten.
They taught us lessons that we must know, because history will repeat itself if we don't remember those lessons.
The men that stormed the beaches were honored at the American Legion with a salute to the flag, a traditional military meal of beans and ham, and most prominently, with World War II memorabilia. Those who attended were able to examine historical films, replica guns, and an assortment of uniforms provided by John Hart.
What was accomplished was unbelievable. And young Americans need to understand what sacrifices they took to do that.
D-Day sparked a campaign that led to the liberation of France and eventually Germany's surrender in World War II. The world may look a lot different today if it weren't for the invasion.
If we hadn't had our forces in Normandy Beach and Normandy, we would not probably be a free nation today.
A total of 4,414 Allied troops were killed on D-Day. It was their sacrifice that led to a German surrender less than a year later on May 7, 1945. Chad Charette, 7 News.